So, as many of you will be aware, the biodiversity net gain rules came into effect on the 12th of February this year. And 5 months on from their introduction, we're going to explore a couple of things. How is the policy translating into practice, and what's been everyone's experience so far? The panel discussion is going to last for about 40 minutes, and then we will open up for Q&A at the end. So do please submit your questions into the chat as we go along, and we will allow time at the end, 15 minutes or so, to do our best to get through them all. We've got a great panel of speakers today, all of whom are really keen to share their insights into what we've seen so far and to discuss key issues for developers, planning authorities, investors, and others. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves now. First of all, Alexa.
Hello, really great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm General Counsel at the Environment Bank. We are establishing a network of habitat banks across the country. And as General Counsel, I look after our legal relationships with landowners, legal relationships with planning authorities and responsible bodies, and legal relationships with the developers that we supply biodiversity units to.
Thank you. George.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's George Hall, head of solar for a company called Conrad Energy. We're an energy developer. We develop, build, own, operate about 85 different assets around the UK. So battery sites, small gas peaking sites, and my role is to sort of focus primarily on solar farms around the UK. So thanks very much for the invite. Really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, George. Neil.
Thanks, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Group Head of Biodiversity for Bellway Homes. One of the many tasks I fulfill for the company is to approve all of our BNG strategies for new sites and new applications going forward. So very much involved with how we deal with BNG as a company.
Thanks, Neil. And Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a sustainability partner at Gowling. I focus particularly on planning and environmental issues in the sort of carbon and nature space. We're advising a lot of clients on biodiversity net gain, whether they be habitat banks, developers, public authorities, conservation charities, and what have you. We're doing a lot of 106 work, some conservation covenants, lots of exam type questions on regulatory processes, giving some portfolio advice, and at the moment doing lots of biodiversity unit purchase agreements or BUPAs.
Thank you, Ben. So I'm going to kick off with an easy question first and ask each of you to share your initial thoughts on what the first 5 months of BNG has brought for you and your industry. I want the good, the bad, and the ugly, please. And I'm going to start with you, Neil, please.
Thanks, Alan. I think in terms of the good, I think important to start off to say it's here. We should not underestimate the fact that it is here, because it's quite a long-winded process to get us to this stage. I think it appears to be supported by the new government, which is great. And I think if we do take a step back, we've got something that is potentially world-changing in terms of the way in which biodiversity is viewed as part of development process. And certainly there are other countries around the world watching to see how things pan out in this country. Perhaps the less good, not so positive. I think we've still got a significant skills gap surrounding BNG, both from a developer, local authority, and ecological consultant point of view. I think the BNG offsite market is still very much in development. It's not functioning yet in the way that it will do at some stage in the future. I think there are specific issues around things like Section 106 and conservation covenants that need to progress and mature before things really start to function the way they're intended to. And I think fundamentally, we're not quite sure yet what 30 years really looks like in reality. We've got the hypothetical scenarios, but not that real clear insight in terms of how we go about delivering this thing for 30 years. So lots of work still to be done.
Thanks, Neil. George.
I think first and foremost, I think it's the overarching program of philosophy is great. Something we've been doing in the solar world has been, using planting and screening and creating biodiversity net gain for 12 years. So we really support this. And it's really good for us to actually be able to quantify exactly what we've been doing over the past dozen years in the solar industry. So from that point of view, it's fantastic. And it actually doesn't really change an awful lot into what we're doing going forward. The bad and the ugly is how do we monitor it? How do we look after it? And what's the impact on our landowners? And what's going to happen, as Neil suggested, at the end of 30 years? And what are the sort of going beyond that? And I'm not sure we're quite clear on what those impacts are just yet.
I suspect we may explore all that a little more over the next half an hour or so, George. Lex, how about you?
Yeah, I think the good really is the magic of a universal metric, really. And I know there's question marks over how appropriate the metric is for measuring biodiversity, measuring losses to biodiversity, and measuring gains to biodiversity. But for any system like this to work, to get some national consensus over measurement is quite magical. It's quite an important step. And recognizing that we could find a way of really scientifically measuring and valuing nature for its worth, and finding a sensible way to allow nature positive activities to continue in our corporate modern world. So I love the magic of a universal metric. That's a major first step. And we're being watched across the globe, really, with what we're doing here, which I think is also really aspirational. Then the less good, of course, is the pain of implementation of anything new. There have been, some real paralysed planning authorities that, have not been resourced to look at this and not always been resourced to prepare, but they've been valiantly supported by the Planning Advisory Service. And I feel like we're almost there. The Gain Site Register is just springing to life, and it feels like many of us are on the cusp. And extra specially good is the publication of the Planning Advisory Service template, Section 106 Agreement for Biodiversity Net Gain, which was a fantastic resource to release to the sector, should really help to start us, to find more confidence in our agreement making, and speed up and make the process more efficient.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Lex. But Ben, how's things been on your desk over the last 5 minutes?
So I think the good is that there's undoubtedly a real buzz. I think in the development industry, we're all talking about it. I've not had a single client huff and puff loudly about BNG. I mean, privately, they might wish things had gone quicker or smoother, but everyone says it's a good thing. And so we're talking about BNG, but we're also talking about nature, and we're talking about green spaces and the well-being that people get. So I think that's really positive. And I think people are using BNG it's not just sort of on-site pockets. People are now talking about, big off-site and then landscape scale recovery projects. So it's it's people have grabbed it and are being ambitious with it. On the ugly, so things that could have gone a bit better, and we can tweak them to make them more beautiful. Picking up on Lex's point, standardization of agreements, that will be a wonderful thing, really, really helpful. I think slow designation of responsible bodies as an alternative to local planning authority under 106 regime. I think, we hopefully in future that won't be an issue, but it's been, I think, painfully slow. As to the bad, I'm going to be negative. I think the bad is still to come. I think trying to be controversial on a web. So I think the Natural England Register could be great, but I think that could be all sorts of teething problems as we start to get to grips with how that works and what have you. I think inconsistency on biodiversity gain plan approvals could be problematic for some developers, and we will have failures. We will have biodiversity net gain failures for sure, and it's how we all deal with that and how. So to use the football analogy, an early reducer, some enforcing bodies need to sort of getting an early reducer, get really involved on day one. I'm not saying do injunctions, all that kind of stuff, but just make sure those failures don't taint the whole industry, because it has to work.
Thank you, Ben. And so is the fact that BNG is now mandatory changing how you're approaching development compared to what you were doing before the 12th of February? So, George, you mentioned a moment ago that actually you guys have been doing this anyway. So be really interested to hear your thoughts on the mandatory piece, and then Neil as well, if you could give us your thoughts from the housing developer perspective. I imagine your interactions with landowners will have changed as well. But George, first of all, please.
Yeah, certainly. I think from our point of view, we started first looking at BNG 3.5 years ago in terms of being able to quantify what we are delivering. And if I take the solar farm for an example, we would be planting hedges for screening. We'd be planting belts of trees. We'd be planting wildflower meadow grasses as a normal procedure for us, because as part of our solar farm application, we were always suggesting the environmental and the ecological benefit. So from that point of view, nothing's changed. What's actually come along is a spreadsheet, and somebody's now put it into a score, and we can now actually say our Herefordshire solar farm's 123%. Oh, that's great, isn't it? Or our Somerset one's 83%, and that's fantastic. The interesting thing now is actually we're starting to put planning applications in with the mandatory. And actually, how do we now allocate those units, and how do we allocate those scores? Because in the past, those scores were based around our screening and our landscaping piece, but now it's actually around biodiversity. And how confident, going back to what Ben was saying, is how confident are we actually delivering the 83% we're looking at? And actually, suddenly it just makes us go, oh, hang on, what happens if we have a failure? What happens if the planting doesn't quite work? What happens if the soil structure doesn't quite allow that type of wild meadow flower to grow? So we're now we'll be providing that for our screening and for our landscaping purposes. But from our BNG, we might just row back a little bit on that to not be quite so, what's the right word, overt on it, and we will just be a little bit, give ourselves a bit of a buffer within that process, just in case something comes along that sideswipes us or changes within the site, because 30 years is an awful long time for these schemes to work.
Thanks, George. Neil, from the housing developer perspective?
I think from our point of view, the good thing about BNG and the process that sits behind it is that it's a leveler. And it should be a standardized approach to how we deal with biodiversity, and brings normality to biodiversity as well. And I think because that's backed up, because it's mandatory, because it's backed up by legislation, it almost becomes, it is unavoidable. Let's just crack on and deal with it. It takes that questionability around how you deal with biodiversity out of the picture. And from that point of view, that brings transparency and that brings process, and that transparency and process are really good things from a development point of view, because we can plan for it. And if we can plan for it, we can deal with it. I think from a land particularly point of view, it has changed things already. It means we need to reevaluate land that perhaps isn't developable for housing, but could be used for BNG. So, land in the floodplain, land on a overhead or below overhead power lines on a gas easement, that you can't develop them, but you can deliver your BNG upon them. So that will start to change how deals are structured, land values, but also the land that's available as part of those land deals. I think it's a good thing that land is going to be managed in a much more favourable way. I think the management is a key part of this. It's really, really important not to underestimate, and particularly the transition from planning to post-development and how that land is managed by the Mancos, and therefore the contract that goes around that, to making sure that continuation of 30 years worth of management in the right manner is a really, really important part of the puzzle that we need to not underestimate, because if that doesn't work, then BNG isn't delivered. So it is changing everything we do, but let's not make it into a problem. Let's just deal with it as another part of the planning process and be positive about it.
Thanks, Neil. And just developing those thoughts then around the monitoring and the kind of metrics. Would welcome all of your thoughts, but I'm going to start with you, Lex, around the 10% And in fact, actually be really interested to hear from any of you if you're seeing that 10% creep up. Have we got a bit of mission creep here as well? But how is that 10% actually being measured? What does a robust monitoring strategy really look like? So welcome your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, of course. And I think it hints back to what George was saying too, for example, like about soil conditions. It all actually starts with some really careful due diligence on the land. Are the soil conditions right for that kind of habitat to be targeted? Is the surrounding land use the right kind of land use to support that kind of target habitat? Would it flourish and thrive? Will it hit its target conditions? So you've got to start with some excellent design, because you've got to build in things like climate change, water levels, soil conditions. You've got to build all of that in to give your scheme the best chance of success within the constraints of the situation. So it really starts with that very, very careful due diligence. You can't just make a lowland meadow anywhere. And it's about making sure it's connecting other habitat types and it's feeding into wider local nature recovery strategies, which is so essential for getting the most out of this effort, time and money. So it starts really with that early work. Then the rest, should in theory be much easier because you've got your starting conditions right. But then you've got the ground preparation, you've got the sowing, you've got the planting, you've got the seasonality of all of that. That all needs to be done in a comprehensive whole to suit the wider scheme. Then you've got what is important for us is we have land managers there that live and breathe that land. They are there all the time. That is part of, for example, a wider agricultural holding that's transitioning to more sustainable agriculture. It's part of that family's assets that they really love and care about it and look after it, and they see every day what's going on. Crucially, it's about things like spot treatment of invasive species that can really undermine a lot of ecological progress if these are allowed to get out of control. So again, management is crucial to maintaining that overall thriving habitat bank and making sure you don't find yourself getting back to some kind of scorched earth situation because it's become overrun. Then you've got crucially to make sure condition assessments are done regularly, that visits are done regularly, and when things aren't working, which is natural, that you're taking intelligent, creative, corrective actions. You're adapting the living and breathing habitat management plan to always draw you towards those ultimate target outcomes and conditions. And so it's about being close, it's about monitoring carefully. There's also innovation in the world of monitoring that could help to take some of this cost away, but always making sure it's getting ground truthed. And what we found, which was quite funny, was with some of the planning authorities we were agreeing 106s with, they didn't want to monitor it as much as we wanted them to. They were like, we can't do this every year. Are you mad? So there's been a bit of a challenge there too, because we want these to be a real profound success, because it's in our business interest to make sure it is. It's important that it works. So yeah, so really designing it correctly first for the situation, which is a really careful process. And that's what I think, Neil, you've said to me before, you've had to throw out plans that are just way too ambitious for the situation. So having that filtration exercise at the beginning is really important. Ongoing monitoring and management and adapting the management plan to suit the situation is what we would say at Environment Bank.
Shall I just come in there? I think
Yeah.
From a developer, particularly from a residential developer's point of view, I think the key thing we need to remember is that what we're doing is creating communities as well as delivering BNG. And therefore, you've got to have a balance within a site of not only creating good quality biodiverse habitat, but also creating space for people to use, to walk the dog, to throw a frisbee, to kick a football, all these things. And therefore, you do have to approach the metric with a certain degree of nous and intelligence in terms of what you can physically deliver within that space, because there's lots of competing pressures on that limited resource. So therefore, I think it's better to be a bit more honest about the way in which the metric is structured. And if you can't deliver your 10% without really stretching it, then perhaps off-site and on-site is the best way to go. And I think in terms of that number, 10% is potentially quite a skinny margin. So if we have a really wet winter, a really dry summer, the chances of some of those habitats not establishing in the way they should is quite high. And therefore, if that happens, you're not going to be delivering that 10%. So certainly the message that I'm giving to our and my colleagues across our divisions at Bellway is that we need to aim for a little bit more. Because if you aim for a little bit more than 10%, you've got a little bit of a slush fund to play with. If you do have a climate change related incident, which means that the habitats don't establish in the way you want them to, you've still got a little bit of contingency built into the way you've structured your metric. So it's about being flexible and not just treating the metric as a purely as an exercise in getting to 10%. It's how you get to that 10% and how you maintain that 10% is the really key part of that process.
I think for me, it's just to echo what Alex was saying. It's all about the preparation. It's about doing your surveys. It's about understanding the soil quality. It's about getting to know the local environment that your project is, whether that's the farmers, the parish councils. It's all about the consultation around that. It's about understanding where it sits in the landscape, and then getting, it's the quality of the ecologist, I'm afraid to say, is very, very important to really understand that. And it's probably a year's worth of surveys throughout this process to really understand what grows, what flourishes. As we've seen this year with the weather conditions, a really wet winter followed by a pretty cold spring and first half of summer. Some things are growing brilliantly at the moment, and other things are going nowhere. So we've got to have a certain amount of resilience within the scheme as well to give us that buffer that we all want, and because we don't want failure at the end of the day at all.
And may I just add in quickly there, just how important it is that there is funding to correct mistakes, that there is contingency funding, and it is built into the commercial model that you're putting together for this, because you've really got to make sure that these management works themselves are funded and safely funded in the long term, as well as contingency to deal with unexpected events and developments.
Thank you. And so, Ben, we've heard Alexa talk about the really important things that we all need to think about when BNG is being delivered, whether that is being delivered by George and Conrad themselves on a project, or by the Environment Bank, who are creating units to sell. Alexa's given us a very convincing speech, but how are we going to hold her feet to the fire? How do we due diligence how this is being done? How are we going to get confident that units are going to be delivered and that 30-year piece is going to be sustained? To your point, actually, Lex, that the funding's got to be there.
Yeah, there's a real spread, I think, at the minute between the sort of the offsite habitat bank. So you've got people like the Environment Bank who've got some established sites, and they've got their they've got their land interest sorted. They're either got some of their 106s done or are well on the way. They've got habitat management plans which are super duper thorough. And if you ask really nicely and you're going to buy enough units, I'm sure Lex will take you to one of them, and we'll point out the trees and everything. So you can, the Environment Bank's got like a cupboard full of units already to buy, which is great. And so you can see it with your own eyes. And then at a different stage of their journey, you've got some sort of fairly nascent entities who are still going to do some great stuff. I'm not saying because they're small and because they're at the start that they're not, but they probably have a little bit more work to do in convincing developers that their product, their units are robust. And so when you enter into the sort of biodiversity unit purchase agreement with them, they're saying that's great. We know what site we're going to acquire now. We just needed that cash flow to get us going and what have you. So there's a slightly different risk profile there, which might be fine. If you're a big developer and you're thinking, right, I'm going to do this development, I'm going to get my planning application in a few months' time. It's going to take a few months to be determined. Might have to go to, you've got 12 months or so plus before you want your units. That might still be okay to be entering into those boopers with those. But it's just a sort of a different issue. And so we spend a lot of time in common with all of them, looking at, what are the actual units you're buying? What's the price? When are they going to be delivered? When do you need them? And then dealing with allocation. But one of the key issues which we spend a lot of time on is termination and reputational issues, which sort of the diligence feeds into. So, you might want to terminate because the units aren't delivered, or there's an insolvency issue, or because the Habitat Bank you're contracting with has had a few problems elsewhere in the country, and you're thinking, "Oh, crumbs, is that the right business for me to be doing a deal with?" And it's slightly sort of contradictory to B&G in a way, because the whole point of offsite B&G is you're buying a compliance product. So Lex is taking the problem away from you. I'll do all the compliance. If there's a problem, I get beaten up by the authorities, you're fine.
As we call a clean break, in fact.
There you go. But a load of the developers I'm speaking to are saying, yeah, we get that, but we still want to know it's good, and we want to know that the habitat is going to succeed. So I think, as everyone's alluded to, it's understanding that reputable developers want to be associated with reputable habitat gains. They want to be, they're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds very easily, and they want to know that what they're getting is the real deal. So in terms of diligence, I want to know that the person I'm buying for has got legal, really basic stuff. They've got legal title. I've got a couple of projects at the minute where I'm not entirely sure who owns the site, and where, have they got title to these units that they're going to be selling? So I want to know where the land. I don't want to do a site visit, but I want to do a quick title check. I want to see if there's a 106 or a conservation covenant. 9 times out of 10 there isn't, and so I want to know, is there a draft? Have you had early engagement with the local authority? What are they saying about it? What's the realistic timetable that you're going to get that signed, in case I need to go elsewhere because you're going to be a break on my scheme? Is there a draft habitat management plan? Who's prepared it? Is it something that, I've done on the back of a fag packet and it's plant a few geraniums and it'll all be fine? Or is it something that a really super qualified ecologist has done? It's gone to the, it's had some proper expert work on it, and we know it's going to deliver. And then again, the point others have made, it's this financial security. So it's not a statutory requirement that a 106 or a ConCov has this sort of security for the next 30 years to deal with management in the event something horrendous happens. But it's not quite negligent, but it's a massive concern that if you're buying units and the 106 doesn't have that security, that's a real problem. So again, a lot of the big developers I'm working with are wanting to know what the financial security arrangements are, just to back that up. And Neil, isn't the Future Homes Hub did a checklist, didn't they? Which I think is from their website with sort of
That's right. So it's based on the BBOC principles, and it's really just a process more than anything else, in terms of both from a volume builder and an SME developer builder point of view. Just the things to ask, the right questions, what you need to think about. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about the other? And just making sure that you're covering yourself in terms of that due diligence process internally, because we're not talking about insignificant amounts of money. Some of these offsite units are very, very expensive, and therefore you need to make sure your process is right. You're asking the right questions, and you're thinking ahead in some respects as well to what the potential issue could be 2 or 3 years down the line, if not beyond. And that's available on the Future Homes Hub website now, if anyone's interested, or it's linked to my LinkedIn feed if you're interested as well.
Yeah, I love that checklist. We've literally used it as a contents list for our 106 readiness packs, as we've decided to call them, that it just beautifully takes you through all the things you need to show you've done what you should be doing. So I think it's even been coming back to us via developer clients of ours. So yeah, hats off to the Future Homes Hub for that, because I think it was a well-needed resource.
Thank you. Just developing that a little bit further, questions for George and for Neil on, so what does a planning application look like today versus one you were submitting last year, for example? Don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, we submitted one for a solar farm last week, and it is very, very similar to what it was last year. We have just been that little bit more careful about what we are promising from a B&G point of view and how we allocate those units. And we're beginning to state that, going back to what I was saying beforehand, the landscaping will create this, and we need that because we need the screening. But we're just being a little bit more careful on what we're promising in terms of actually delivering what we can, because until we know more, until we've got this monitoring in place and had a year or 2 years worth of data as to how we are actually doing, we want to be a little bit kind of careful in terms of those promises we make. So that's been the biggest change for us, really.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I think it's incumbent on everyone submitting planning applications to help the local authority out. There's a lot of negativity around the resource available to the LPAs, the speed with which they respond, and all the rest of it. We understand that, but actually, if we're submitting something into that system, we want to make sure that what we submit is as good as it can be, and it gives the local authority confidence in what we're suggesting we can do. It helps them. It's clear. It's easy to understand. And the mantra within Bellway certainly has been do it right, do it once, and make sure that you submit that information in a form that the LPA can read, understand, and then hopefully just progress without any cause for quibbling around BNG. That's a slightly simplistic way of looking at it, but I think ultimately we've got to do our bit to make sure that BNG doesn't grind to a halt because of planning.
Can I ask a question, Helen? Am I allowed? Is that overstepping?
I think that's okay. That's okay.
One of the things, when BNG policy was first announced and we were looking at government responses, obviously lawyers get very risk averse and we're like, oh, chance of judicial review and all this kind of stuff. And we're saying, oh, you can avoid that by getting your biodiversity game plan approved at the same time as planning and what have you. And then the rules came out and said, no, you can't submit your biodiversity game plan, which is the document that they use, isn't it? The authorities to tick off your planning condition allow you to go on site. Are you, because you can't submit that in anger until after your planning, are you putting draft biodiversity game plans in sort of like indicative only, but clearly this is exactly what we're going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all part of that process of making the job easier for the local authority. And we're actually going to the extent of, here's our draft BNG plan, and here's a background in terms of what we've done about securing offsite units if we need them. So we're not giving them a full legal document, but we are giving them comfort that we have actually spoken to people like Lex, the Environment Bank. We've got solutions. We know we can deliver it, and therefore it's not a problem.
I think from us, because ours is going to be more on site. I don't think that the draft BNG plan is quite so important for us. I think it's, we'll work with the local planning authority through that discharge of conditions procedure to make sure we give them what they want as part of that. So I think it's probably a little bit less important for us, and it got a mirror with our landscape and visual plans and our ecology reports as well. So it's all intertwined.
Thanks, George. Lex mentioned at the start of the session that the Planning Advisory Service had just launched that suite of template documents a few days ago. Ben, I imagine you've been over them, you've been reading them constantly since the launch. Would welcome your initial thoughts on what you've seen in those, please.
Yeah, so I think there's 3 or 4, and there's sort of the on-site, there's off-site, and there's one for habitat banks as well, isn't there? Plus draft planning condition, I want to say. I mean, I've gone through one quickly. I must admit I've had a bit of a hairy week, but they're really good. The one I've looked at is really comprehensive, and sort of addresses a number of the issues that we are, I guess, coming across dealing with local authorities on 106s and terms of financial securities, this, that, and the other. But I'm going to defer to Lex, who I know has read them cover to cover.
I've obsessively read them and celebrate them massively. Huge thanks to the Planning Advisory Service for all the work they've been doing in this process, which has been a challenging implementation period and an ambitious one. But it's certainly those templates are a fantastic starting point to, I think the word maturity was a good point in terms of, as this matures, we will probably refine these documents. Things will start to feel natural and normal and second nature. But what planning authorities have had to do, which has been really tough, is come out of the normal world of 106s. This land is 106 land to build a school on, into this land is 106 land for a 30-year nature project. And just how different that is in terms of risk, in terms of who the parties should be, in terms of funding mechanisms, in terms of monitoring enforcement. And also, you know, crucially, a thing that came up at our recent 106 roundtable that Gowlings had kindly hosted, which is sort of what helped to springboard this template 106, is also if you've oversized your habitat bank or you've undersized it, what do you do about changing the size and shape of a 106 over 30 years? All of those things don't typically come up in a normal development context because the development timeline is so much more constrained. It's a lot shorter period. So that 106, those template 106s were excellent on that front. My only additional comment would I'd love to see more parity between how on-site 106 is dealt with and how off-site BNG is dealt with. There is definitely a big distinction between the two templates in the drafts that were produced. And what we would like to be pushing for is a better balance between the two, because really you want the on-site delivery is basically a habitat bank as I see it, and it deserves that level of attention, monitoring and overall chances of success. So there's a bit of a distinction there, but otherwise, you know, just hats off to the Planning Advisory Service. I think this is going to really help to reassure and give confidence to planning authority lawyers that they're not walking in the dark on this. They're doing something that's balanced and appropriate.
Yeah, and it does put that marker down, doesn't it, about that financial security, which is really critical. And I think someone in the Q&A has asked about insurance and stuff, and it's and that's something we've been looking at from a conservation covenant perspective. You know, drafting templates and what have you. It's how you get that financial security, and is it parent company guarantee, is it escrow, is it percentage of unit sales, is it a bond, is it insurance and stuff. And it feels like you know, if you don't want to sort of wish your life away, but fast forwarding 6 months until the market started coming up with even more creative solutions, because we're all comfortable with highways bonds and things that last 18 months until a big thing of concrete's built and you can point to it and say, look, rip up my bond. But this is much trickier. But hopefully by having that, putting the marker down in the template, it's going to be really hard, I think, for a local authority now to say, no, you don't need to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. I can't not ask a question about the fact that we have a new government. We had an election less than a week ago now. What impact, if any, did the pre-election period have? Did any of you notice? And secondly, what difference do you think the new Labour government will make to BNG, if indeed anything? Neil?
I think it's fair to say that Purdah hasn't helped in the election period, and that's feels like it's lost a little bit of momentum because it landed when it did. It did what it did. That's fine. We've got a new government now. We need to move forwards with it. Certainly, the noises coming out of Labour as part of their manifesto were generally quite positive, but fundamentally, the planning system is what needs to change and what needs to be repaired. And I think the sooner that process becomes more fit for purpose, perhaps, for want of a better phrase, then the sooner things like biodiversity net gain and all the other considerations, other material considerations as part of that process will start to function in a much more efficient way. I think things like the greyland policies that have been mentioned are potentially very, very positive if they're implemented in the right way. I think the planning targets in terms of number of plots to be developed is also positive because that brings confidence with it. But the underlying issue really is the planning process and the planning system. And until that's fixed, then nothing's really going to change moving forward. So fingers very much crossed that Labour do manage to deliver what they've pledged to deliver as part of their manifesto.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. I mean, I think we're at the crunch point in a challenging implementation period, like all new policies have. I think that something that turbocharges development in a nature positive way is a really good thing. And I feel like any ambitions to rapid growth I'm glad that's being done in a way where there is a biodiversity net gain policy there to make sure that happens in a nature positive way. And I think that to me is crucial, and that with BNG fully implemented, with that game site register absolutely chocker full of absolutely compliant and fantastic habitat banks, what you will have is a frictionless way to deliver fast growth, fast development in a nature positive way, while all of these habitat banks across the country are already maturing, growing, established. So we're really supportive of that, and keen to really make sure that BNG is that crucial green infrastructure that facilitates that rapid growth.
I think from our point of view, from Conrad's point of view, I think the new government has created a bit of differential between themselves around renewable energy, and really wishes to sort of progress that. So it will be interesting to see actually how they make that happen. I agree entirely with Neil. You know, we have our own issues around grid and those types of things, but the other big blocker for us is planning and the planning system. It shouldn't be taking a year, 18 months to grant planning permissions, and we've got to do something about that otherwise we won't be supercharging anything, you know, with those sorts of timeframes. I haven't fully listened to the speech yesterday and how all the implications of that are, but the sort of the direction of traffic seems to be they're going to look at easing this planning system with targets, and we obviously support all of that, and it looks like it's going to be a fairly bright you know, period of time for the renewable energy industry, which is great for all of us. And it seems that the BNG and ecology is going to be a cornerstone of that. So a really vibrant space to be in at the moment.
Yeah, BNG is new, so it's not sufficiently broken that it would need to be urgently fixed in the same way, you know, community infrastructure levy seal has sort of constantly in the past been something that needed to be looked at. So I think it won't be interfered with too much. It needs to bed down before that happens. And I think the others are right. It's things like greenbelt housing targets, making affordable housing genuinely affordable, that will focus politicians' minds. I think obviously, yeah, responsible body designations slowed. You know, haven't been any for a while. Whether that's entirely down to that pre-election sensitivity or not, I don't think that really is the whole picture. I think they were slow before. And going forwards, you know, would a Labour government say, well, look, we've had 10% mandatory BNG for a while now, a year or two. Actually, we can turn the dial up a bit now and make it 12.5, or maybe for some types of project, you know, certain really long infrastructure projects, we could set a higher tariff. And I know some local authorities are looking at that as well, you know, 20, 30% and what have you. So it feels like that's where the future tweaks would most sensibly be.
Thank you. We've got loads of questions coming in, so we'll move to the questions in a moment. But can I just have your one item each that's at the top of your wish list for the next 5 months in respect of BNG? George?
For me, the biggest concern is to do around with the landowners, and how do we give landowners comfort that a battery installation or a solar installation is a temporary installation. It's a 40-year planning permission, and the condition of that planning permission is that I must return that land to exactly the same state it was in when I walked through the front door. But yet I'm going to change that because I'm going to do all of this biodiversity net gain. And then what happens at the end of the 30 years when I've got an area that is biodiverse being enhanced, but yet I've got a set of rules and a lease that, you know, Helen, you've, you know, helped us with, that says we must return it back to what it was, and there's a conflict there, and I'm not sure how that's going to pan out.
Neil?
I think, to pick up on one of the points that's made earlier, I would like to see the availability of offsite units go from virtual to reality. At the moment, there's a lot of patchiness across the country. There's quite a time lag, and for developers looking to have that immediate solution, it's not there, and that needs to change very quickly. So my hope and my intention is to support that as best we can, but we really need that market to start functioning in a much more robust manner than it is at the moment.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same about Neil. We really just can't wait to see eased with things like the PAS template 106, just local planning authorities reassured towards agreement so that we can get that game site register full, and developers have got a reliable offsite solution that can just help to reassure and bring offsite into their decision making more easily.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to my wanting some really bold, well, not zero tolerance approach to BNG failure, but local authorities and responsible bodies sorting out nonsense early on to make sure that everyone, the whole BNG industry thrives.
Thank you. So we'll work through a number of the questions. I'm going to take the first one because it's easy, which is, are we going to circulate a recording of this session afterwards? Yes, we are. That will come around by email and it will be on the website. Answering a couple at the same time, we've had one question from Alex Ryan. Thank you, Alex. Could you please expand on the concerns around financial security regarding Section 106s and the purchase of BNG credits mentioned earlier? And then at the same time, we've also had a question, does the panel see an opportunity for insurance to help facilitate investment to provide the financial backstop to any biodiversity net gain failures? Who would like to start off on those ones, please?
I'm happy to take the insurance one because I have been pondering that. So I was thinking that through, and the big challenge that I see is one of the biggest risks to a habitat bank is mismanagement. And also one of the biggest risks to a habitat bank is bad design. So I don't know quite how that is insured. It's not quite like crop loss insurance because a flood has come in and meant that you haven't got your crop loss. You've got a kind of professional liability point when it comes to professional design. Then you've got a management. You can't really insure yourself for choosing not to spot treat an invasive species, if that makes sense. So I'm pondering on it, but I'm not sure yet that I've quite seen a policy that can address the biggest risks, which are accidental or deliberate mismanagement and poor design.
And shall I take the question around 106 and what that means? So the 106 or the legal agreement on the land will say you've got to implement or lay out your new habitat, and then you've got to look after it for 30 years. And the point is that an offsite habitat bank might do all that work, sell the units in year one, and then sort of, Lex might run off to Mauritius and spend lots of time on a beach, and then someone's got to look after this habitat bank for 29 years, and the funds have pretty much gone because they come from the unit sales. So having a mechanism in the 106 that said, look, if you go bust, if you disappear, if there's a problem, the local authority or the responsible body in the conservation covenant world can sort of huff and puff and then say, okay, fine, we'll do it. Or a freeholder might say, fine, we'll sort it out. And so they're not saddled with a 29-year maintenance problem. There's money in the pot for someone to come and do that. Now, that's not a problem for the developer who's bought the units because they've satisfied their obligation. They've ticked the local authorities signed off their conditions. They've implemented all that kind of stuff. It just goes to reputation of people like Bellway and Conrad wanting to know that what they buy is a proper solution to the biodiversity crisis. There's no legal liability for someone buying a unit. It's just wanting to do the right thing.
And there's reputational damage to that as well. I would just chuck in there from a developer's point of view is that we want to make sure we're dealing with the right people who've got the right product to sell us. But equally, if they do fail to meet their obligations, that will inevitably at some point come back on the developer as well. So it goes back to the due diligence piece and making sure we're doing business with the right people who can actually deliver what we need them to deliver for 30 years.
Thank you. Just developing that, the ability to deliver. We've had a question, a challenge. Is there realistically capacity within the existing and imminent Habitat Bank provision to meet the government's 1.5 million homes ambition? Is there a danger that a capacity squeeze might be seen as a break?
I don't think so. The amount of schemes, habitat banks under development now there's a lot of activity going on. The actual development demand, for that number of houses is not, I don't think, absolutely huge. There is a lot going on, a lot of really good quality schemes coming forward. I see capacity as not an issue. I see just getting over this hiccup of registration and implementation, where you'll see that actually there's a really flourishing offsite market, and that's exactly what we're here to contribute towards.
I think there is a note of caution with the NSIP requirement, which comes in 2025, because by their very nature, those projects are probably going to demand a lot more proportionately off-site units than perhaps a housing development would. So that's potentially the next critical challenge to the off-site market. And when that becomes a reality, how does the market adapt and react to that kind of pressure and that kind of demand?
Thank you. Question has come in for George. Be great to hear a battery storage perspective. Can you share any learnings from within Conrad?
I think the key thing goes back to a little bit what we were saying earlier about preparation, and it goes right back to day one and site selection. And so what we found is that rather than finding enough room just for the batteries, we're now finding we're finding enough room for the batteries plus the BNG right from day one. So there's a number of challenges in the battery market, whether it's noise and fire risk and a couple of other issues. So you're trending to find battery sites becoming slightly larger in terms of their footprint, the spaces between the batteries, these types of things. So by increasing that land grab at day one, you can then build in 2 or 3 acres for biodiversity net gain in the first place, which tends to lead us to sort of locations that are probably slightly more greenbelt sites rather than brownfield sites or commercial industrial estate sites where it is more difficult to get BNG scores, but also more difficult to comply with fire regulations or noise regulations. So we're finding those working hand in hand, and it's, again, preparation.
Thank you, George. Lex, you used the phrase earlier, the magic of a universal metric. We've had a question. Any comments from the panel about oddities or unintended consequences of the metric? For example, woodland planting is often punished at the hands of the metric, potentially creating less good overall outcomes. And is DEFRA listening? Will the metric evolve?
Definitely. The metric's already evolved massively in this pre-mandatory period, and it's essential to get it right. And lots of things have been corrected. There's been some really arbitrary implications of spatial multipliers in the past. There's been all sorts of tweaks and adjustments and recalibrations that have been needed. I think in the context of what it achieves, which is to bring us all into using one metric, is extraordinary. And there'll always be odd peculiarities. I know there's something about garden land. There's some odd thing about garden land that I've seen is causing issues. DEFRA and Natural England are definitely listening. They've just got to make sure they don't change it too rapidly, because people do need time to let things bed in. So I do think they're listening, and I do think those issues are kind of negligible next to the sheer scope of what they've managed to achieve.
Absolutely. And I think to defend DEFRA here, just for a second, they have given the option on all of their pages on their website to give feedback. And I really would encourage anyone who does have a concern about the way the metric functions to give them that feedback. I mean, I follow various BNG pages on Facebook and things like that, and there's individuals on there that will moan about the metric all day and all night. But what I want to see is them being proactive and actually constructive about that, and letting DEFRA know what they think, flagging where they think an issue may be, and also coming up with a solution as well, because it is an iterative process to a certain degree. It is very new, it's very bold, and it's not going to be perfect. And DEFRA have been very upfront about the fact that it's not a perfect system. But a perfect system can only get better if people only feedback in a positive way. So I'd very much encourage anyone who does have concerns to let DEFRA know and start that interaction with them.
I love that you're up all day and all night reading Facebook BNG pages.
I'm just sad, Lex.
Yeah. But you're right. I can't think of another policy in any area where the sponsoring government department have been quite so accessible in turning up to conferences, to private roundtables, having conversations, and yeah, it's a phenomenal team at DEFRA who put this together and been really receptive. So,
just as an example, we're about to, we're developing a scheme which is a floating solar scheme. So we're putting solar panels on top of lakes. So as the very first question the ecologist walked in the room was, how do I get BNG on water? As a question. So 6 months ago we had no answer to that, and now we have got an answer. We've done our pre-app with the local planning authority, and they're going to be quite happy with our approach to that. So it's, yeah, there'll always be quirks to any system that comes in. Agree. It sounds like everybody's been listening and working with the relevant parties to come to a sensible solution.
Right. That feels like a suitably positive note to end on, actually. So we have got a few more questions still to go, and where people have put their names on or specific queries, then we'll come back on those as well where appropriate. Finally, it just goes to me to thank all of you for your time. Appreciate, you are all very busy BNGing. So thank you for joining us. It's been really interesting, really enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much to everyone that's dialed in. We've had the best part of 200 people, which has been great to see. So we do hope you have found it an interesting and useful session as well. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.